before we even get into Acts.
You need to have a cut intro that says Bible Classroom Podcast was recorded in front of a live cafe audience. Please. The 90s child in me needs it.
How do I say that? Like, is it just that one line, or is there more to it?
I mean, I'm recording the room too, so I might just cut Jordan in.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Wayfarers Christian Church Bible Classroom. My name is Nick Griffin, and I am the lead pastor at Wayfarers, and I am super excited that you have decided to join us today. In this season of Bible Classroom, we are looking at the book of Acts. But since this is the first one of these Bible Classroom series we've done on the podcast, our teaching pastor, Noah Randolph, thought that it would be a good idea to give you some general rules to follow when studying the Bible. Specifically, he gives us two very important questions that we always need to ask ourselves before jumping into any book. This is really helpful as just an intro to studying the Bible if this is your first time diving deep into it. If not, and if you are just rearing and ready to jump into the book of Acts, I'd encourage you, go on and skip to the next episode. Noah jumps straight in to some of the themes in the book of Acts. But we thought this general intro to Bible study would be really important. I also want to say, if you want to join us, we record these podcasts live and in person in the Sustain Coffee pop-up space, also on the campus of Mid-South Christian College, where we meet for our Sunday services. We record these on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m., so if you want to join us, ask questions, and participate live in the Bible classroom, we would love to see you. It's every Thursday, 6 p.m., on the campus of Mid-South Christian College in the Cafe Sustain Coffee space. We'd love to see you there. Otherwise, enjoy this episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to Bible Classroom. This is an opportunity where I get to teach from a book of the Bible with you guys, and I'm really excited to do this. We are launching into our Bible Classroom series on the book of Acts. So we're going to be kind of walking through today the first two chapters of the book of Acts, and then in the following weeks, we're going to have Nick come on and walk through several chapters in the book of Acts. And then Ashley Wakefield is also going to walk through some chapters in the book of Acts. And we're going to do this over a period of 9 weeks, kind of going throughout the whole summer. So this is going to be a fun summer class. Everybody's excited for summer class, right? Yay! But yeah, so that's what we're doing. This is, for me at least, going to be really fun because this is my first time getting to walk through a book of the Bible with Wayfarers Christian Church, which is the church that we're affiliated with. And I'm really excited because I love to talk about the Bible. So this is going to be fun to dive into. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So I figured I'd start this off with a bit of a story. This is something that I was thinking about kind of throughout the week and relates to those of you that are baristas in coffee shops or have been baristas in coffee shops. But I want you guys to kind of sit back and imagine yourself in a position where you have been looking for a new job and you recently found a new position has opened up at your local coffee shop that you're really excited about, and you've been hearing great things about this coffee shop. They serve like the best coffee ever, and you finally work up the courage to turn in your resume, and you get the call that says, yep, we want to see you, and we want to talk with you about becoming a barista at this coffee shop. So you go in with high expectations, and as you get there and meet your boss for the first time, as he sits you down and interviews you, he has a very weird approach. Instead of asking you the typical interview questions about what's going on in your life, like what are your aspirations, what are your goals, he hands you this book that's like massive. It's like probably 2,000 pages in length. And he says, this is our book of how to be a great barista at this coffee shop. What we want you to do, instead of answering all of these weird questions that interviewees ask, what we want you to do is go home and read this 2,000-page book. And if you feel like after you read this 2,000-page book, you feel competent enough to be a barista, you're hired immediately. So you go home and you open up this 2,000-page barista manual. And you find a lot of weird things in there. Like the first 5, you find one that it's not just one book, but multiple books. Acts, and they're all dedicated to like different things. You find this old manual that's describing how to like grind coffee with like a mortar and pestle, and you're trying to figure out like what does this have to do with like grinding coffee in a modern coffee day shop, and you're trying to figure out like why is this even in here. You find sections on like the creation of coffee and how like coffee was created in some like weird like way where there was like sea monsters and all sorts of different things that just sound so confusing. And as you continue on through this book, you find one, that this is going to be a lot more time than you thought it was going to be. And also, a huge portion of it is poetry as well. And you're just not really good at reading poetry. And so as you continue on, you find that this just isn't the job for you. It's too much of a time commitment to really figure out this book. And you call and say, I'm sorry, this is really weird. I can't do this. The story I'm describing to you is actually kind of the experience that a lot of us have as Christians with the Bible. We're handed this 2,000-page book where we don't really know how to read it in the first place. It has all of these different genres, all of these different approaches to talking about how to be a good person. And frankly, it's very hard to get into. And so what this class is, what I'm going to try and do for you guys, is basically explain how to read the Bible in this one class. And then the last half of the class will focus specifically on Acts. And we'll take a lot of the principles that we learned in how to read the Bible and we'll apply them to specific passages in the book of Acts. So that's basically kind of our plan for the day, right? You're going to stick with me for this first half. We might have like a little bit of a break or something in between. And then for the last half, we'll do really focusing in on the book of Acts. So first thing we're going to start off with, kind of getting our tool chest here for reading the Bible. First thing I start off with is 2 questions. Anytime I'm opening up a book in the Bible, it could be Genesis, the first book in the Bible. It could be Acts, what we're opening up today. When I open up the Bible and find this book, I ask 2 questions. The first question is, what am I looking to learn in this book? Okay, so this is a question about asking something about yourself, right? This isn't asking stuff about the text. This is asking, what am I hoping to learn from this book, right? And there's a couple things that this question does for us in particular. For one, it allows us to have this opportunity for personal and spiritual growth, okay? So this is going to sound kind of weird and fancy, but don't worry. All that means is basically when you ask, why am I reading this book in particular, you learn something about yourself. You learn some of your motivations. You learn some of your goals. And you can even ask it that way. What are my goals in opening up this book? Because I'll wager most of the time you don't just like open your Bible and, oh, it came to this passage here, I guess I'll read that. That's generally not how we read the Bible. We usually open up a book because we're looking for something. A lot of times it might be that we're going through something hard, right? Like we're going through a struggle and we're looking for an answer to some question. And sometimes we don't really know that we're asking that question until we ask it, right? And so that's the point of this question, right? Is sometimes we're asking that question so that we know about why we're actually like trying to figure what we're trying to figure out, right? Another reason is we may have like an intellectual question that we've heard about in circles. We may have like some type of quandary that's come up in politics or with our friends or any type of philosophical query that may be really nagging at us, right? You know, what is the meaning to life, right? 42. Like those types of things. We're wanting to know what is at the core of this universe and why we fit in it. And so we might be opening the Bible to answer those questions, right? Another reason you might be opening the book is because you've had a previous history with that book. Maybe you've heard that book in a sermon before. Maybe your best friend mentioned you should read that book because of so-and-so, right? Maybe there's some type of story attached to that book that is making you want to read that book right now. And that's a good question to ask too, because if you're asking, why am I reading this? And you come to the realization, oh, I want to read this because this friend told me to read it, or maybe it's been coming up in different circles all around me, and maybe I want to learn more about it because it's like seems to be cropping up everywhere. Maybe asking that question gives you a good insight into the fact that maybe God is pushing you in the direction towards this book, right? And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. And you'll start to notice these things more and more as you begin to like read the Bible, is you'll start to hear like conversations about a book of the Bible that you maybe just happen to have read or were going to read and then heard more and more about it. And suddenly that prompts you into that book further. So we can learn a lot about like what God is pushing us to with asking this particular question. The last reason you should ask this question, though, is a big fancy word that a lot of us use in more academic circles, but I'll try and break it down for you. It's hermeneutics. And what hermeneutics is basically the lens through which we read something, right? So the point is that we don't ever approach any text, especially the Bible, with a blank slate. And what I mean by that is we're not coming to the text without a question, right? And that's the whole purpose of asking this particular question in the first place, is we always come to the Bible with some reason, with some idea that we're looking for some purpose, right? There's always a goal when we read the Bible. Even if you flopped open the Bible and just found a couple of verses and read them, your interest in those verses will matter to if you like them or not, right? You'll have a personal affinity for them. And if you don't have an affinity for those verses, you may close your Bible and open it back up again to a different part of the Bible, right? And so there's always something in you that has some type of lens that is sifting through the information as you're reading it, right? Sometimes this gets very aggravated to the point that we're looking for a very particular topic in the Bible. And a lot of pastors actually do this when they preach. What they're trying to do when they open a book of the Bible, like Acts in particular, is they're basically looking at the book and thinking about all of the things that would matter the most to their congregation, right? To their church. And then from that, they then pick out the most important things that they think will matter to their specific congregation, right? That's not unbiased, right? That's a hermeneutical approach is what we would call in academic circles. That's taking a lens approach where you're looking at a passage and deciding, I want to teach on this because I think my congregation is struggling with this, right? And again, that's not wrong. That's totally okay. And this is a process that churches have been doing since really the beginning of church founding. Even Paul does that with a lot of the things in the Old Testament that he uses in his letters. So we're able to do this. We're able to use hermeneutics to our best ability. One of the most famous ways that we use hermeneutics is we always look at the Bible as the story of Jesus. And we're always constantly looking for Jesus in the text. We're looking for some way that Jesus can either fulfill some of the questions that are in this particular passage, or we're looking for ways that Jesus can be represented even symbolically in some of these texts. And we get to see some of that played out through different passages. And we'll get to talk about that more when we get to the book of Acts. So all of those are ways that we can ask that question. What am I looking to learn in this book, right? That's a lot of information all at once, but again, very simply, all that is asking something of yourself. It's asking, what is my motivation? What are my goals when I open this book, okay? So that's the first question. Once you have asked that question, you'll ask a second question, and that is, what does the author want me to learn in this book, okay? So you've basically figured out your own motivations. You've figured out what's your goal, what you're looking for, what are the questions you're trying to answer, right? Now you're asking a harder question, and this is a more scientific question even. This is a question that matters a lot more to the academic circles, and that is, what is the author of this book trying to tell me, right? There's a lot of pluses to this method in particular, and a lot of people argue really strongly for this question because primarily they're more interested in what the author has to say than what you might want to find in the Bible, right? And a lot of people sometimes argue that what you're looking for doesn't matter at all because like you're biased when you're looking for yourself, and that's not good. It's not good that you're biased. Like I said, I don't hold that approach. I think it's okay to be that way. I think that we can get some really good interpretation, but I do see that there are a lot of strengths in this question. First off, one of the first things that you'll learn when you start asking the question, what does the author want me to learn, is you learn history, because you kind of have to know what an author 2,000 years ago was trying to tell you is, right? Like you gotta kind of know like what was life like for this author? What was the types of things that they were going through? What are the types of ways that they want to communicate what they're trying to say? All of that's communicated through history. And so we have to learn history to learn what the author is saying. So for instance, we're walking through the book of Acts in this class. So we know that the author of Acts is Luke. How do we know that? Well, we kind of know that through history because we have a bit of cluing in through the biblical text itself, but we also know through some historical data that Luke did exist and that he did write these books. And we have been looking towards Luke in particular as an example of someone in the first century who had a Greek and also Jewish context in which he was writing, which influences how the book of Acts works, right? And so there's a lot of history that's tied even into every chapter that we go through the Bible. A lot of teaching the Bible even is a history lesson. It's just the fact of it being 2,000 years old. I have to communicate history to you for you to really get what the Bible is trying to say, right? And again, that might be hard for some people, especially if you're the type of person that doesn't like history. But hopefully we do it in small chunks, right? And we can do it in a way that's small, bite-sized enough that you don't have to learn everything right away, okay? So that's first thing about asking, what does this author want me to learn? The second thing is the most important for this class here today. This is the topic that I'm going to focus the most on in this class period. And it's the topic that's also the most really important to me as a person, and that is theme. Theme is a topic that gets talked about, I feel like, only in English classrooms and nowhere else. And the problem with that is that when you talk about theme with normal everyday people, they're like, wow, you're talking really weirdly. And I kind of relate to that, honestly. Like, it is very weird to start talking about, man, that theme in that movie was just so awesome. I really liked how he was like bringing out this like really cool sense of like death and decay and that like motif or whatever. And you're just like, what are you talking about? You know, like it feels very removed from reality, right? And the hard thing is that so much of the Bible is communicating when it's trying to communicate through theme, right? And so without running the risk of going to art school, what I want to do through this class period is explain in depth some of the themes of the book of Acts. And we're actually going to spend a large portion of this class period looking at themes. But if you don't know what a theme is, if this is your first time interacting with a theme, never heard what the word means, a theme is basically an idea or some type of notion that the author has that they then craft into their stories, right? They're using this type of idea, maybe of death, and they begin to communicate it in various different stories. So I'll use an example that most people are familiar with, Harry Potter. Harry Potter's main theme throughout all 7 books is death. Spoiler, if you haven't read the series, a character dies at the end of almost every book. And it's very intentionally focused on death as a topic and how kids in particular deal with death, right? That's just something that if you go to art school and English school, you recognize, but you might not recognize if you're just an everyday citizen. And that's why it's really important to focus on theme, because it's hard to really spot that if you aren't paying attention. And this is where it really gets into the nuts and bolts of reading the Bible, is focusing on theme. All right, so the next one we want to ask, the next part of this question, is genre. Genre is also a term that we use a lot in English classrooms and not a lot elsewhere. Maybe in music. We do use genre a little bit in music and in like maybe reading and things. But for the most part, genre is a term that, for the Bible at least, is hard, because with the Bible, there are genres that are not applied in any other setting. There is a genre in particular called well, I guess I should explain what genre is first, shouldn't I? Genre is a category that we give to particular books, in this case, particular books of the Bible. And this category that we give them sort of labels all these books under one name, so to speak, right? So for instance, we give the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, a genre name. We call them Torah, which means law. And these really focus around the laws of the Old Testament time period, right? And all of these are labeled under that term, Torah, which means law, okay? From the rest of that onward, we have Joshua all the way through to the prophetic books. And we give those books from Joshua all the way through to Ezra and Nehemiah the genre historical narrative books, right? And those are kind of its own group of books that are all talking about history, and they're all telling it through a narrative, hence historical narrative, right? Then we have a large section in the Old Testament that's poetry and prophetic in voice, right? That section is like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Those are the big three I call. And then we have a book of 12 small minor prophets that are all under this. And we give them the genre prophetic books. And then after that, we have this smaller kind of subgroup that's kind of like the miscellaneous group of the Old Testament in a lot of ways. And this is sort of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. And that's the term we give it, wisdom literature. And these are books like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, right? And so all of those kind of fit in the Old Testament. We have the same with the New Testament. The first 4 books are called the Gospels, and that's their genre. Acts gets its own genre. It's its own little thing. It's a historical narrative book that's set during the same period as the Gospels, or right after, basically. And then right after there's a whole debate, by the way, that I won't get into, of like why the Gospels are separate than Acts and why can't they be in the same genre. It's fun, but I won't get into that. But after that, then there's the letters that Paul wrote. And we know that they're letters because they're obviously addressed to someone. So we call them the Pauline letters because they're addressed from Paul to someone else. And then any other letter that's written in the book just gets labeled general letters, or general epistles is sometimes what you call. And then finally, there's this small little category that the book of Revelation gets called apocalyptic literature, or apocalyptic, which basically just talks about things that haven't happened yet that will happen in the future, essentially. So those are the genres of the Bible, right? You might not have ever heard any of those terms before. That's why I went through this whole long list, just so you have a good idea of all of them. Like I said, we're just going to be talking in historical narrative today. There's one important thing to know about historical narrative. Historical narrative is just as interested in telling you how to live as a letter of Paul might be, for instance. A lot of times we think that stories are just there to tell events and to tell how things happened in the past. But with the Bible in particular, that's not the case. A lot of times they use the narratives as a vehicle for communicating what you should do today. And that's a very important point that's very unique to the Bible. It's very rare that we have a book or a story that's trying to get you to do something through its actual story. It'd be really weird, right, if like Harry Potter were written so that it was trying to get you to go out and cast spells or something like that, I guess. I don't know. Like have some type of like, oh, let's go do this kind of part to the story, right? But that's the way that the Bible and their stories, especially their narratives, are written. Every story is trying to get you to realize something and to do something in some way, shape, or form. So that's the importance of genre when we ask this question. What is Luke trying to get us to do, right? The next one is language, all right? So when we ask, what does the author want me to know about this book? What does he want me to do? Language of the text itself really matters because unfortunately, the Bible was not written in English. It was written in Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic, and Greek. And all 3 of those languages have their own nuances. Don't worry, in this class, we're not really going to touch anything about language. One, I don't know Greek as a teacher. I just am very less on Greek. I know a lot about Hebrew, but I don't know as much about Greek. And so I don't feel comfortable teaching you guys about Greek words and Greek meanings when that's just not my field. I'm getting better at it and we'll eventually get there. But for now, we're going to stay on a more macro level and not really touch language as a topic. Also, because this is an intro to the book of Acts, it just doesn't make sense to go that deep into what does this specific word mean and why does this word mean this and things like that. That's like looking for a needle in the haystack when you haven't even named the haystack yet. So that's what we're working on. And then the final one, or a couple others that we're working with, is the Old Testament scriptures also inform how Luke wants us to read his book, right? In the Old Testament scriptures, there is this, oftentimes the book of Acts will use the Old Testament scriptures in quotations, especially in this particular 2 chapters that we're going to be going through. In these chapters, a lot of quotes from the Old Testament get used. And if you haven't read those Old Testament passages, you're not going to get the full meaning of what Luke is trying to tell you in the book of Acts. So you have to kind of know these Old Testament passages before you go into this, right? And then finally, there is literary structure, which again sounds very much like an English class art school thing. Don't worry, again, this is just a way that every author constructs their book. It's basically their outline, if you will. So finally, after you've gone through all of that, and trust me, I recognize that that's a lot. I know that that can be overwhelming, especially if you're opening the book for the first time. Don't worry, you don't have to think about all this all at once. You can pick one or two of these things and really focus on these things. Like I said, I even said we're not going to talk about exegesis and language today. We're not going to worry about Greek words and things today. You can decide to focus on just a couple of these things, right? But the important thing is to really ask those two questions. Again, what am I looking to learn from this book? And what does this author want me to learn from this book? This also can be kind of difficult in some circles. Some people argue that maybe what you're learning to look for in this book doesn't matter at all. And no, it's totally okay for you to want to learn what you want to learn. Okay, so don't let people tell you that just because you have this personal problem that you're working through and you're looking for verses that are trying to answer this problem, don't let people tell you, well, that verse doesn't apply there at all, and you won't ever get that answered in the Bible. Don't let people tell you that. Really begin to pay attention and let the Spirit speak to you, even in verses that on a first read through may not be that, maybe on a second read through they will be, and that's really helpful for you as you continue on. For example, in Jeremiah 29:11, there is a verse that gets quoted all the time on soccer vans and on doorways and mats and all different places that you find them in Christian households. And this verse is, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you." Right? This is a verse that is used all the time because it's a really endearing verse. It's a verse that's communicating that God is going to take care of the people that he's saying this to, right? Now, the problem is that when you read the whole of Jeremiah 29:11, you realize that God's actually saying this to the people of Israel in a specific time. And oftentimes, there's a group of people that will use the fact that this is historically set way before, 1,600 years before, basically, and use the fact that it's set then and say, you can't use that verse on your car. You can't use that verse on your mat because it doesn't apply to you. It was specifically addressed to the people of Israel in this time period. God doesn't have the plans in mind for you in particular. He had the plans in mind for the people of Israel that were going through the Babylonian exile, right? And that's the way their argument goes. My point in this, with this first question, the question again of asking, what am I looking to learn in this book, is that you can still use that verse as an application in this way when asking that question. Because the fact of the matter is that God does care what's going to happen to you and does have your plans in mind. And we can learn this through other verses like Romans 8:28, which is a good example, right? And there is a way in which I've found really helpful to kind of explain this, how we use this first question for good and not for evil. And that is kind of the explanation using a book that some of you may know, some of you may think is really nerdy, which is The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. In J.R.R. Tolkien, he starts his world and his creative narrative with this character who creates the world. That's pretty typical of fantasy settings. You usually have a character that creates everything. But in this particular case, he does an interesting choice. Instead of just having his character create everything, he has his main creator create a bunch of smaller creations who then are charged with creating the rest of the world through singing. And as they sing into creation different things, what they have to do to be able to create well is they have to sing in harmony with the guy that created them. And so they're all singing this one song in different ways, creating different things, all in harmony with one another, right? And this idea is what later will be called sub-creation, right? Is where a main creator creates all of these smaller creators and then they sub-create, right? Through singing. In the story of J.R.R. Tolkien, there's a particular character named Melkor who decides he's going to create, just like the rest of them, but sing in dissonance to the rest of them, and begins to sing different melodies than the melodies that everyone else was singing, and be his own little thing apart from everyone else. And what that does is create catastrophic, ugly repercussions for the entire world, and things go completely awry because he's not singing with the rest of the group. Okay? What does this have to do with asking the question, what am I looking for in this book? The point is that when you're reading the Bible, that is how you should be thinking, is you should be asking the question, when you're asking this particular question, am I looking for something that's in harmony with the rest of the Bible, or am I looking for something that's dissonant with the rest of the Bible, right? And that's the important part. If you're going down this rabbit trail in which you already are kind of aware that the thing you're looking for is in dissonance with the rest of the Bible, then that's something that we wouldn't say is okay, right? Like that's something that's going to be harmful for you if you continue to look into, right? But if you're in this mentality where you're looking for things in the text that are in harmony with the rest of the text, then it's completely okay to do that. So let's go back to our Jeremiah 29:11 example as a practical example of this. Because of Romans 8:28, we know the interpretation, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you. We know that that's actually in alliance with the Bible. That's not in dissonance with the rest of the Bible. That's a concept that's true in other verses, right? So there's nothing wrong with pulling a personal and basically like love of that verse for that reason and sub-creating in the same way that these sub-creators in Tolkien's story were sub-creating and sub-creating meaning in the text by engaging that way. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what I really want to drive home for you. So if you're looking at a text that may be talking about someone trying to end their life, for instance, and you kind of know that like this text is really talking about something else other than that, they're trying to get home different ideas, but that really means something to you, and you know that the Bible values life, you know that that's big on every page of Scripture is valuing life, then you can totally take that passage as mattering to suicide and the topic of suicide. There's no problem with that. You see what I'm getting at here? We're sub-creating meaning on top of the meaning that might be there with asking this second question, right? Second question, again, being, what does the author want you to learn from this book? And remember, it's always important to ask that second question. You can't just do the sub-creation without that second question. You do need to know what the author is trying to tell you. But once you know what the author is trying to tell you, and once you find what it's saying, you then can ask that first question and sub-create meaning in that, and it be okay. So yeah, always ask that first question and then always ask that second question too. Because if we don't ask the second question, if we just stay with the first you can actually ask without any prior knowledge at all. You don't have to go to any classroom sessions. You don't have to go to anything. You can just open your Bible and ask that first question. What am I looking to learn for in this book? And you can do that on your own. Like, you don't need me. You don't need any pastor to do that question. And that's how many Christians have done it for a long time, especially in countries where they don't get the liberty to actually sit in classrooms like this because they can't, right? Like that's how they've been learning for a long time. So what we have in this country is we have the privilege to be able to do this second one. We get the privilege to actually learn about the history of the Bible, the themes of the Bible, the genre, the language. We have all of these resources where we can really dig into Scripture in this deeper and profound way where we're really finding out what this author wants to communicate to us. And it seems just like a shameful waste to like throw all that aside for just like a personal like learning experience, right? Like we should be good stewards of the Bible, and we should have a good stewardly mentality when we come to the Bible, and we should really want to know, what does Luke really want us to get here? What does Luke really want us to connect with in this? And if we kind of walk over that and just leave that by the wayside, well, we're just kind of really doing it half-baked, right? It's just sort of a half-baked scripture, and we're not getting the full intensity of what Luke's getting us towards. So we can't we can't just completely get rid of the first one, and we can't get rid of the second one. We have to ask both questions. What am I looking to learn in this book, and what does the author want me to learn in this book? Okay? So the goals for this class are fairly simple. We're going to focus on a little bit more in this class what the author wants us to learn, mainly because for each individual person, what you want to learn is going to be different. So I can't really focus on that because every individual person is going to have their own individual questions, and I can't focus on that, all of those questions at once. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the second question. And then our second goal is that we're going to play a very unique focus on theme in general. I'm going to focus on theme because I think that's the one of all of these in this description that's the least talked about. And so we're going to walk through theme a lot more than any of these others. And then finally, I'm hoping to then show how these themes in this second question can lead to personal and spiritual growth as a result of learning them. And they can help you as a person in your life. So strap in. We're going to basically cover small portions of the book of Acts, and we're going to do this right now. So let's go.